So we move on to lesson 3, and this lesson is all about cope with stress symptoms. Now when I talk about COPE, it's actually an acronym I came up with, and it stands for Cerebral, Operative, Physical and Emotional. So do you cope with stress symptoms? Let's have a look. Now we know that stress is unavoidable. When stress feels overwhelming, we feel as if we are incapable of handling it. This leads to a learned behavior, which is the feeling of helplessness. This is a learned behavior because it is triggered by reaction and conditioning. So for example, you know that you need to take your kids to school and you are taxing them to school. And because you sit in traffic and you know how stressful that is, when you do that kind of behavior every day, it then becomes a trigger to react and that reaction becomes a conditioning. So we react to the feelings and then we instill a condition to act or behave in a certain way. When we are stuck in traffic, we start this looping thought. Would we get the kids to school on time? Would I be able to come home and get on with my chores? And this is time wastage. And this goes on and on and on like a little loop playing in your mind. Now we fail, when we are in this situation, we fail to see a healthy, constructive way to deal with the situation. When we start this looping thought of negativity, that is when the pause button comes in and we become problem makers rather than problem solvers. Stress reinforces the sense of helplessness, leading to despair, where you feel useless, rubbish, stupid, and snowballing from these feelings of stress is anxiety. You fear what lies ahead, a fear of uncertainty. The new stresses you have stumbled upon is yet to come. So what are the stress symptoms and how do we cope with the stress symptoms? We looked at the stress symptoms in the last lesson, so let's look at how do we cope with it. I'm going to be using my presentation here. So if we look at cerebral, now what happens when we are stressed and how does stress affect our cerebral function? So firstly, you would notice that when you are under stress, your memory becomes weaker. You start to lack concentration. You have these negative thought patterns playing on and on and on in your mind. You feel that you're constantly worrying, and you don't just have this feeling, you literally constantly worry. You have these intrusive racing thoughts that pops into your mind. If I don't do this, this might happen. What if I end up going down that route and not that route? If you do not curb this, intrusive thoughts can lead to compulsive behaviors, and then you can start obsessing over it, and that is how OCDs, obsessive compulsive disorders, actually start from. And you also, when this is all happening, your memory is affected, but also your judgment. You have this obscure judgment. You cannot judge things in its right frame because you are now in this space where the glass is half empty instead of the glass is half full. Let's look at the second one, the O, operative. Operative is actually to do with your behavior. How are you operating? We end up with very erratic sleeps. Because we have so much going on in our minds, we find it hard to sleep. And because of these erratic sleeping patterns we have, we end up becoming procrastinators, and we start to neglect ourselves and our bodies, and we end up putting on weight, we end up binge eating and so on. We end up then with nervous behaviors. You find when people are nervous, they end up biting their nails. Sometimes some people, they end up pulling out their hair. They end up pulling out their eyelashes. They even end up pulling out their eyebrows. and they start to really neglect their bodies, and they start to hurt their bodies. And that's when stress becomes really chronic. You also find that eating problems develop. When you are stressed, your body doesn't cope well, and you either start binge eating or you start staying away from food. Eating disorders are some of the biggest issues to actually solve, because it goes very deep within the mind, where the feelings of not being good enough and not being enough and not being loved and not being lovable comes into play. We also find that when we are in this operative state of stress, we end up self-harming, and besides hurting our bodies, we end up becoming addicted to drugs. We become addicted to alcohol, to cigarettes, to weed, and this can be a really bad snowball effect. And we also might find ourselves being violent. You'd find a little child, when a little child is undergoing stress that he can't explain or articulate his feelings, what does he do? He ends up banging his head on the floor or against the wall, and that is a way of saying, I can't cope, and they end up self-inflicting pain. Let's go on to the third one, which is the P, which means physical. So what physically happens to you? The stress symptoms in your physical body. So illnesses. Illnesses are a huge thing. When you have stress inundating your body, that stress comes from a thought, and that thought is an energy, and that energy is flowing in your body. And when you have these negative energies flowing in your body, your brain kicks in, throwing in chemicals that it shouldn't be producing, because your body doesn't need toxins. And that's how we end up getting ill. We'll talk about that a little later on, and how the mind and how the brain works when we are stressed. We also end up having very low immunity. We have body aches and pains because our muscles are tense. We end up getting sick so often because our immunity is low. We find that we lose hair, and we lose our libidos. If you think about it, when you are stressed, you'd find that you don't have any urge to be intimate with your partner. And that is when you lose your sex drive and your libido. And also, you might be feeling really nauseous, and you have these dizzy spells because the stress levels in your body is so high, and it needs to be curbed. So the fourth symptom, which is emotional symptoms, when we are stressed, we feel loneliness. We feel like isolating ourselves. Think about it, when you are stressed, you just don't want to be around other people. So isolation, we become very angry and aggressive. We become irritable, moody, and we become so overwhelmed with these thoughts and these feelings and these internal, external factors that are happening around us. We also feel that we are so unhappy and we lack love, because we feel unloved and we feel that we don't have happiness around us. These are two things that really bring us down our spiral. And the last one is numbness and being emotionless. So a lot of the time you'd find that when you are stressed, your body is affected to such an extent where you do find numbness in your hands or your limbs, and you do feel just emotionless. You feel this emotion emptiness. And if we don't realize and understand why we feel this way, and these are the symptoms in our body, then we have to become more aware of it. Because if we don't know what the symptoms are, then how are we going to cure the stress so that our bodies can work better? So what I'd like to do, you have a copy of this in your workbook. I want you to take a highlighter, and I want you to start highlighting all the symptoms that you have. Make a note of it in your workbook. I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but do not become overwhelmed, because remember, the first comes awareness and then comes the cure. So after you look at this, the cope, how you cope with stress symptoms, I would like you to circle them and then move on to the next task, which is the stress box. Now you must be wondering, why would you want a stress box? Now let me tell you. If you keep all the stresses in your body, it's affecting you. So what I'd like you to do, and get into the habit of having a pack of post-its at home. My husband laughs because I have so many post-its, packs of post-its. I even give post-its to my clients. So get a pack of sticky notes and keep it into your handbag also. And every time you feel overwhelmed or stressed, jot it down. When you find that you are feeling overwhelmed or you're stressed, or there's a part of your body that's also feeling that stress, jot it down on these post-its, put them into the stress box. You would be surprised that by the end of the day, you will have that stress box being quite full. Now, do not fear, because what we are going to do, which you are going to enjoy and have fun with, you are going to empty the stress box. Because this whole feeling of emptying the stress box is such a beautiful feeling. And we have a meditation at the end of this module which you can use after you do the emptying. So write down your post-its, pop them into the stress box. Once you finish, I will show you how you can get rid and empty those stress post-its that's in your stress box.